Yeah. So, I mean, we talked about PlayStation just now. Going into our next horrific decision, all I could say is Nintendo, Nintendo, Nintendo. Ugh, Matt, what am I talking about?
I mean, this might be the biggest. Like the Sega one was bad with Saturn. This is probably. I mean, Nintendo created their biggest competitor. Literally created it. So I'll read this excerpt really quick. This is from Replay: The History of Video Games by Tristan Donovan. It should have been a coup. On May 28th, 1991, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, Sony proudly revealed that it was working with Nintendo to create a version of the Super NES with a built in CD drive. The two Japanese companies had been working together in secret on the project, tentatively titled the Nintendo PlayStation. Since 1989, with the hype about CD ROM reaching fever pitch, Sony's announcement should have been the highlight of the trade show. But behind the scenes, all was not well. Since agreeing to the alliance, Nintendo had become increasingly nervous about Sony's intentions, fearing that it wanted to use the project to muscle itself into the game's business. Nintendo's paranoia was justified. Ken Kutaragi, the Sony engineer who initiated the whole project, saw the partnership as the first step to achieving his dream of getting Sony to start making game consoles. Suspecting as much, Nintendo decided to strike first. The day after Sony gave its announcement, Nintendo announced it was dropping Sony and now is working with a Dutch rival, Philips, instead.
Great! I'll grab my stuff!
Sony was shocked at the public humiliation Nintendo had inflicted on it. But if Nintendo had hoped to push Sony out of the games industry, that move backfired.
Boy, did it backfire.
Yeah, I mean, the important parts in the middle where Ken Kutaragi probably, he wanted to get Sony involved in games and somehow, and this was the first step. Like he said, Sony, Nintendo was probably justified into being nervous about Sony, but all they did was just make it happen way sooner. And instead of maybe finding an alliance together to move forward,
Mm-hmm.
creating these things together, they burned the bridge, pissed on the ashes on its way out, and like just totally embarrassed Sony. And they were like, okay, all right. They made the PlayStation One
Yep.
that
Sony,
competed with the N64.
it did. Sony was like, well, we got this hardware. What can we do with it? Oh, let's make our own.
And now,
The rest is history at that point.
yeah. I mean, the PS2 was the biggest selling video game console of all time and still is.
You know what? I wish I can know like the real reason why Nintendo pulled out of this partnership. It's just it, I don't understand it, man. That was the probably the worst decision Nintendo could ever make.
I mean, just to not have the foresight of, listen, if we pull out now, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is they already know what they're doing, and they're just going to make a system to compete with you. The best thing you could do is try to strengthen your partnership and hope to God they don't turn against you, and then you have to deal with that. But
Right.
instead, they were like, we're just going to cut you off. But at that time, Nintendo was video games at that time.
Yes.
I mean, they finally started getting some competition from Sega, but they were still top dog.
Everybody knew Nintendo. Everybody knew Nintendo. Even
Yeah.
people who don't play games knew Nintendo.
Adults called video games the Nintendo, whether it was a Nintendo or not. They didn't care. It could have been an Atari 2600. They're like, stop playing the Nintendo.
That's right.
So I think it was a little bit of arrogance and stupidity. Not, perhaps it's just because we already know the history of what happened, but to not think that that was a possibility, that they're just going to spin off and do this even faster than what they might have done in the future, is completely stupid.
Oh man, yeah, because we had the birth of the PlayStation One, which caught fire like it was not. It was insane how fast that thing caught on. I think we mentioned it in one of our other videos. It's like it pissed me off because we've been playing video games for years, but once the PlayStation came out, it made playing video games cool again.
Oh yeah.
Oh, without a
Oh yeah.
doubt. So it started that whole trend, and then you got the PlayStation 2, and then you get then that you got the whole fanboy thing, the Sony fanboy, the Sega fanboy, the Nintendo fanboy. It was just, and then it just took off from there. And like you said, Nintendo created their own monster.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, I was an N64 person during the PS1. I did eventually get a PS1. I had one. I have games for it, obviously. I think the PS1's a great system. I just have way more nostalgia for some of the games that came out of N64. Like, I mean, I know we mentioned GoldenEye already, so I'm not going to bring that up again. But like, show me one game on PlayStation that's better than The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's really good PlayStation games.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's no
I mean,
Ocarina of Time.
well, they gave us Final Fantasy VII.
Square gave you Final Fantasy VII. PlayStation
True.
just happened to have a partnership with them at the time. Nintendo happened to also piss them off as well. Interesting. Are you guys noticing a theme here of these companies just pissing other people off and like crazy shit happens? Like that seems to be like.
I'm glad the PlayStation came out. However it came about, I'm glad it came out. I loved it. It had so many games, so many games. It gave us the birth of Resident Evil. It gave us Wipeout. It gave us Crash Bandicoot. It gave us Spyro. I mean,
it gave you about 8 billion JRPGs that people still love to this day.
Still loved it. Final Fantasy VII being one of them. That was it. It gave us Tomb Raider. Just we can go on and on and on about when you say PlayStation. There's certain titles that pop to mind, and just the thought of what could have happened if Nintendo kept that partnership, what we could have gotten.
It would be very interesting to see that. Like
it would have.
Can you imagine it if they made it like a PS2 together, like a PS2 GameCube hybrid, and just all the great games were on those two systems?
Oh man,
and Xbox. But most of those. Like during the PS2 era, I have a GameCube, I have an Xbox. I love those systems also. Mm-hmm. But during that era, PS2 was my go-to system, man. I played the crap out of my PS2. Just like last generation, PS4 was my favorite system. Played the crap out of my PS4.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I love my PS2. I really did. I really like my Xbox too.
I like them all, to be fair, but PS2 is certainly in the top of my list for sure.
My whole fear with the PS2 was the whole, will my system play the blue discs or the silver discs?
That was a bad time.
Because when your drive went, you had to determine which lens went. Was it the DVD lens or was it the CD lens?
I think I mentioned this on the last show that we had, but two of my favorite consoles of all time were terribly broken, which was the Xbox 360 and the PS2.
And the PS2.
I probably own 5 of each of those because they just constantly broke.
Yeah. But it was still fun to play. Still had great games.
It was, man.
Still had great games.
Heck yeah.
Horrific business decision. Thank you, Nintendo.
Horrible decision.